One.
This is a true story that happened to me. If I hadn't been so vocal about it, no one would believe me. A few years ago, I was dating this guy named Craig. Craig and I had broken up in a very dramatic, ugly way. We both said some mean things that we regretted but hadn't yet apologized. One night I was overwhelmed with the need to tell him I was sorry, to make amends. I called him, apologized, and we talked for a few hours. He invited me to New York City, where he was living, the following weekend. That Friday night, I called to let him know I was on my way. I felt this sick, nauseated feeling when he didn't answer the phone. He was an extremely healthy 24-year-old. No illness or health concern in sight. I knew, though, that he was dead. It was overwhelming, the feeling of his absence. I continued to call Craig over and over from home until my best friend stopped me. I insisted that he was gone, and that if I went to his apartment, I'd find his body. The city is about 3 hours away from where I live, and at this point I tried convincing myself that my friend was right, that Craig was just blowing me off. At about 2 a.m., the police called me from Craig's phone. They said that they'd found his body in his bedroom of his apartment, and that the constant ringing of his phone alerted his roommates that something was wrong. The police asked me why I continued to call him, and I told them that I just had a bad feeling. They had a lot of questions, and ultimately it was determined that he accidentally overdosed on prescribed pills and alcohol. I generally don't tell people this story because it sounds so crazy.
Two.
I had a falling out with my father, and I hadn't spoken to him in at least 6 or 7 years. This caused me to lose contact with my youngest brother. A year before his death, I felt the need to see my brother, and that I needed to tell him something before it was too late. I made contact with my father, but selfish as it is, I did it only to see my brother. I found out that he was hanging out with a group of students at college, and he wanted to join their fraternity. I felt this crazy need to tell him that people who hurt you are not your friends, and that he should leave immediately if he feels afraid. Please don't let them do anything to you. His parents were kind of upset that I was telling him that, but I felt that I needed to say it. One day I was sitting at the computer when I was suddenly surrounded by this purple flickering light that blocked out my vision. When I regained my vision, I felt him leave me. I just started screaming. I ran to the phone to call my dad, but he wouldn't answer the phone. My brother was murdered. Don't ask me how I know, because how did I know he was dead before ever getting the news from my other family? My oldest brother called me about 15 minutes later to tell me what I already knew. They were kind of upset that I could talk coherently when they called, but they didn't know that I had my screaming fit before they had called me. What's really weird is that my family is not close, but all 3 other people in the family called him with the same message. I think sometimes we are given warning signals in life, but it is up to us to listen to them or ignore them. I'm happy that I got to tell him that I loved him, and that I was proud of him, and that he would always be my baby brother, no matter how tall he got. The worst part is that I knew he was dead before anyone ever called me. We lived 226 miles apart.
3.
This happened when I was 11. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather was getting old and had been in and out of the hospital a few times that year. At that moment, he had been in the hospital for probably 2 days. We had gone to the hospital to visit him, where I gave him a big hug and told him that I loved him, and I would see him tomorrow. That night, I went to bed, and I had the most beautiful dream. My grandpa came into my room and sat in the rocking chair in the corner. He invited me into his lap and told me that he was going away for a while, and that someday he would see me again. I shouldn't worry, because everything was going to be okay, and he wasn't in any pain. I smiled at him and gave him a big hug and told him that I understood. I then looked over at my brother sleeping in the bunk below me, and I asked my grandpa if we should wake him up to tell him. When I turned back around to get a response from my grandpa, he was gone. I ran to the window to look out into the front yard. There he was, waving at me. He whispered,
"Go and tell your mom and dad exactly what I told you."
I looked back at the door to my room and then back to my front yard, and he was gone. I immediately woke up, ran to my parents' room, and turned on the light. I told them exactly what my grandpa had told me. They told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I told them again exactly what Grandpa told me. Again, frustrated that it was 2 a.m., they told me to go back to bed and we would talk about it in the morning. Just then the phone rang. It was the hospital. My mother started sobbing. Grandpa had passed away. At that moment, she just sat there with my father staring at me. I still remember their faces. They both looked at each other, then me, then each other, and then finally smiled and stopped crying. They gave me a big hug and told me that they loved me and to go back to bed. They ended up going to the hospital that night, and my aunt came over to watch us. But we have never talked about that night since. In fact, I don't think I have ever written about it, which explains the tears rolling down my cheeks right now. That was liberating. And I'm glad other people have had these types of things happen too.
Four.
I was hiking with my then 4-year-old son when he looks at me and says, "Dad, Mommy's pregnant. It's a brother, but I want a sister." I laughed. 2 weeks later, my girl takes a test and she is pregnant. We were hoping for a girl. Came out a boy who we love immensely. I asked her, "Did you think we were pregnant, or did you speak to Dave about it?" "No," she says. "That night I took the test was the first evening I suspected it and decided to buy it. It was very odd, but then it happened again when my wife was pregnant with our daughter. Not only that, but I wrote a date in my journal while doodling one day. My son was born on that exact day. When my baby boy was a few months old and was being taken to the babysitter's, he grabbed some change from the car. He then put it back but kept 1 penny. When my wife dropped him off, he handed her the penny and she put it in her coat. That day at her office, a patient was short 1 penny and the doctor would not let it slide. My wife then pulls out the penny and hands it to the client. To this day, she trips out about this. This was only the first of very many like occurrences.
5.
My parents lived about 90 minutes away from me in my old hometown. Often I would make a trip of it on Tuesday nights to see some friends and then swing by my parents' house. We chose Tuesday night as none of my guys' significant others would object to hanging out during the middle of the week. Usually hanging out with my friends between 7 and 10 p.m. I would drop by real quick to see my dad after 10 p.m. The obligatory "I'm in town and would be an awful son by not dropping by" visit. Since I went back about every other week, it was nice to get the FaceTime with my dad. This was pretty frequent, especially during the summer. Since he was retired, he just watched TV until the early morning hours. Why not, right? Now, when I'm dreaming, I know when I'm dreaming, and if I'm having a bad dream, I can wake myself up. Or if I'm dreaming something funny, I will interact until I wake up. Essentially, I'm able to control my dreams once I realize I'm in them. It's been this way for the past 10 years or so. It's kinda cool, except when I have some crazy shit happen in them. Then I want to wake up as soon as possible. Now, linking these two items up. One evening after visiting my friends, I decide to drop by my parents' house. I usually walk through the garage using my dad's key code into the house to the den where my dad watches TV. My mom would be asleep, so most of the lights would be out except the light from my dad's den. So I'm walking through the house and I seem to be floating. As I get to my dad's den, I say hi. It's at that moment I realized, wait, something isn't right. Today isn't Tuesday, so there's no way that I can be here. This must be a dream. At that point, the entire room, house, environment goes dark. Suddenly, I'm in this dark space room, looking at this ghoulish figure with a somewhat scared, shocked, oh my goodness face. Like he realized that I knew this was fake. It was like the curtain was dropped and then I saw the puppet master. Making eye contact with him, he kind of looks like a clownish figure. Crazy teeth, pale face, weird clothes. Like a Phantom of the Opera meets killer clowns from outer space. I only get a brief moment in this space with him before he also goes poof to vanish. After this, I immediately wake up. Groggy, I roll over, check my phone, and then I see that it's about 2:30 a.m. I chalk it up to a crazy dream and then go back to sleep. The next day, I call my dad just to chit-chat to see how the day is going. We're talking and he tells me, late last night I was watching TV. Next thing I know is that you're standing in the doorway. I go to ask what you were doing here so late, and then you just sort of fade away, like a computer graphic. Just bit by bit until you were gone. I figured then that it was time for me to go to bed. Instantly my stomach knotted, and I ask him what time it was, and he responds, "Oh, late, not sure, probably after 2 a.m. Yikes. So then I tell him my dream and he figures it's something we'll never be able to explain. Something from another realm. We weren't sure if it was God or dark spirits or anything else. It freaks me out. I wonder if there is something watching me or maneuvering my days. It's pretty freaky. This always gives me the chills when I think about it. My dad has since passed, but I still think about that day. To me, this just affirms the connection that I had to my old man. I hope he has some answers now. Until then, I hope the ghouls stay away. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the show. If you have a story to share, send us an email, like us on Facebook, share, like, and subscribe.